Experts couldn't solve it for years, until a poor maid fixed everything in just 1 minute. There is a government building in India, not a famous one, not the kind you see on postcards or in history books, just a large, old building with long corridors, high ceilings, and the kind of heavy silence that only government buildings seem to carry. The walls were painted the pale yellow that someone had once decided looked official. The floors were marble, but old marble, the kind that had been walked on by so many feet over so many decades that it no longer shone. Inside this building, something had been going wrong for a very long time. There was a large clock on the main wall of the entrance hall, a grand old clock, the kind that had been put there decades ago to remind everyone who walked in that time, in a government building, was serious business. The clock had a face the size of a dinner table. Its hands were long and black, and for years, not weeks, not months, but years, it had not been working properly. The problem was strange. The clock would run for a few hours, then stop, then start again on its own. Sometimes it would run fast, sometimes slow. Engineers had been called in, more than once. Experienced men with clipboards and tools and very confident voices. They would open the back of the clock, poke around, declare something fixed, collect their payment, and leave. Within days, the clock would go wrong again. This became a source of quiet embarrassment for the senior officials of that building. A broken clock in the entrance hall is not a good look for any institution. It tells visitors, before they have even climbed the first staircase, that things here do not quite work. Meetings were held. Memos were written. A committee was formed. Because in government buildings, whenever a problem becomes embarrassing enough, someone forms a committee. The committee recommended calling in more engineers. More engineers came. The clock was examined, repaired, cleaned, oiled, adjusted, and declared fixed. Again and again and again, it kept breaking. At some point, people simply stopped expecting it to be fixed. The clock became part of the furniture, a familiar broken thing that everyone had learned to work around. People would glance at it out of habit, then check their wristwatches. Junior staff would warn new employees on their first day, "That clock, don't trust it." It had been broken for so long that its brokenness had become the normal state of things. Now in this building, there was a woman who came every morning before the offices opened. She was not an engineer. She had no qualifications written on any piece of paper. She was a cleaning woman, one of a small team who arrived early, while the corridors were still empty and cool, and swept and mopped and dusted, so that by the time the officers arrived, everything looked presentable. She had been doing this job for years. She was not paid very much. She was not noticed very much. She moved through that building every morning the way water moves through pipes, quietly, efficiently, going wherever she was needed, and leaving no trace of herself behind. She was not the kind of person anyone would think to ask about a broken clock. Every morning she would mop the floor of the entrance hall. Every morning she would move around the base of that large broken clock on the wall, cleaning beneath it and around it. And every morning she noticed the same thing. The clock was mounted on the wall, yes, but directly beneath it, on the floor, was a large potted plant. A big, leafy thing. It had been placed there for decoration at some point, probably by someone who thought it softened the look of the entrance hall. It was a healthy plant. Someone watered it regularly. It grew well. And every time it was watered, the water that soaked through the soil and into the base of the pot would slowly seep across the floor. Just a little, not enough for anyone to notice immediately, but over hours and days and weeks, the moisture would spread beneath the base of the wall where the clock was mounted. The clock, you see, was old. Its mechanism was not sealed the way modern clocks are. The moisture from the plant, rising slowly through the wall, getting into the housing of the clock, was affecting its internal parts. Rust, corrosion, slow and quiet damage, happening over years, completely invisible to anyone looking at the clock itself. The engineers had always looked at the clock. Nobody had ever looked at the floor beneath it. One morning, the cleaning woman finished mopping the entrance hall and went to the small office where the building's maintenance supervisor sat. She was not someone who usually spoke up. She was not someone who had been asked. But she had been watching this problem long enough that something in her finally decided it was worth saying out loud. She told the supervisor, very simply, that she thought the plant beneath the clock was the problem, that the water from the plant was getting into the wall, that this was probably what was damaging the clock. The supervisor looked at her for a moment. He did not immediately take her seriously. It would be dishonest to pretend otherwise. She was a cleaning woman. The problem had stumped actual engineers. But something about the way she said it, quietly, without drama, just stating what she had seen, made him pause. He walked with her to the entrance hall. She showed him where the water spread after the plant was watered. He crouched down and looked at the base of the wall. He pressed his hand to the wall near where the clock was mounted and felt it. The wall was damp. He had the plant removed that same day. Then he called an engineer. Not to fix the clock this time, but just to clean out the moisture damage in the wall and the housing. The engineer did that. The clock was dried out, the small amount of rust was cleaned, and the clock was put back in place. It worked perfectly. It has kept working since. That was it. That was the whole fix. Move the plant, dry the wall. Done. No new parts. No complicated repairs. No committee. One conversation. One observation. One small action. And years of a baffling, expensive, embarrassing problem simply disappeared. When people hear this story, the first reaction is usually a laugh. Not a mean laugh, more the laugh of recognition. Because most people, if they are honest, have been on both sides of this kind of story. Most people have, at some point, been the expert staring so hard at the complicated thing that they completely missed the simple thing right in front of them. And most people have also, at some point, been the person who noticed something obvious that nobody else seemed to see, and stayed quiet about it because they didn't think anyone would listen. The cleaning woman noticed the plant because of where she stood. Every morning, at ground level, with a mop in her hand, working in the quiet before the building filled up, she was in the perfect position to see what everyone else walked past. The engineers came in, walked directly to the clock, opened it up, and went to work. They were focused. They were professional, and their focus, ironically, was part of the problem. They were so trained to look at the mechanism that they never looked at the environment around it. This is a very human thing. It is not a flaw that belongs only to engineers or experts. It belongs to all of us. When we become very familiar with something, we stop seeing it freshly. When we are trained to think in a certain way, we tend to look for answers within that frame and nothing outside it. The engineers thought in terms of gears and springs and mechanisms. The idea that a potted plant, a decoration, something with no moving parts, something that had nothing to do with clockwork, could be the source of a mechanical failure, simply did not fit inside the frame they were working in. The cleaning woman had no frame. She had only what she saw with her own eyes, every single day, at floor level, in the quiet hours of the morning. There is something important here that goes beyond the clock and the plant. It is about who we listen to, and more honestly, who we do not listen to. In almost every workplace, in almost every institution, there are people like her. People who are present every day, people who work close to the ground, in a very literal sense. People who see the same things over and over and over, who notice patterns that people passing through will never catch. And very often, those people are not asked. Not because the people in charge are bad people, but because we have built systems, formal systems, institutional systems, that decide, before anyone opens their mouth, whose observations are worth hearing. Qualifications, job titles, seniority, salary, these things determine who gets listened to. And this is understandable. You cannot run any organization by asking everyone for their opinion on everything. But the downside of that system is real, and the story of that clock is a small, clean example of exactly what that downside looks like. Years of a problem, many rounds of expensive expertise, resolved in 1 minute by someone who had been overlooked for years. She did not demand credit. She did not put it in those terms. She just said what she had noticed and went back to work. That is the other thing that makes this story stick. There is no triumph in it. There is no dramatic moment where she stands up in a meeting and proves everyone wrong. She said what she knew to a man who finally listened. The problem got fixed, and her day continued pretty much the way it always had. That kind of quiet is not the same as indifference. It is more like the dignity of someone who does their work well and does not need applause to keep doing it. She cleaned those floors before anyone arrived. She noticed things. She finally said something, and when it turned out she was right, she did not make it her identity or her moment of victory. She just moved on. Think about the places in your own life where something has been broken for a long time. Not a clock, it could be anything. A process at work that everyone complains about but nobody questions. A habit in a family that nobody challenges because it has simply always been that way. A rule in an organization that made sense once, years ago, and makes no sense now, but which everyone follows because it is the rule. These things stick around not because they are impossible to fix, but because the people who could fix them are not the people who are looking. And the people who are looking, the ones who are there every day, at ground level, watching the same thing happen again and again, are often not the people who get asked. The fix is usually simpler than the years spent not finding it would suggest. That is almost always the way. The maddening part of this story is not that the clock was broken, it is that the answer was there, visible, every single morning, for years, sitting on the floor in a terracotta pot and asking to be noticed. All it took was one person who was humble enough to crouch down, look at the floor, and realize she had seen something worth saying, and one person on the other side who, for once, decided to listen. That is the full story. A broken clock, a plant no one questioned, a woman no one asked, and a minute, one ordinary minute, that ended years of confusion. Not every problem needs more expertise. Sometimes it needs different eyes. Sometimes it needs the person who has been mopping the floor in silence to finally be asked, "What have you noticed?" The answer, when it comes, might surprise you. It might even make you laugh. And then it might make you think about all the other plants you have placed beneath all the other clocks, and never once thought to move.